So it's been really exciting along the way, and a couple things that I really hope that we can get out of it tonight is, one, this is a great crowd of people. I haven't been able to meet you all tonight, but we don't know the Bay Area. We're from New York City. We don't know all the great stuff going on here, but we hope that we can create a space tonight where you really feel inspired or re-inspired to keep doing the work you're doing, and to get to know each other and to work with each other, with the diversity of people in this room. And the second thing is, we hope that we can really encourage all of us to take it outside of this room. Because I don't know if you feel this way, but often I think we end up talking to ourselves a lot. And with something as big as climate, we gotta reach other people. So that's one of our challenges tonight, is to inspire each other, but to also inspire people outside of the room to find their way to make a difference. So that's my spiel for the evening, and I want to tell you, we're going to do a little bit of a fireside chat version here, where we're going to be sitting up here. And my last bit is, all of the speakers tonight, they are very brave, because they don't know what we're going to talk about. So there are no presentations, no set speeches going on. It's really going to be an impromptu conversation. And to open up this conversation, I'm really excited to have Ashel Eldridge here, who is going to be inspiring us with some music and spoken words.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Questions in your head. You are the answer to a world gone mad. You are the love that permeates your soul. You are the one. You are the one. You are the one. You are the one. You are the answer to the questions in your head. You are the one. You. The music, okay. Who's on the other? One world, one voice, and one choice, one movement, one people, one planet. Together we forever, one heart is magnetic. One voice, and one choice, one movement, one people, one planet. Together we forever, one heart is magnetic. One. Yeah. that people want to know where we start. Yeah, you know like the, well, you know like the, oh yeah. They say the kingdom of heaven is inside of the heart. Most say the most high reside in the heart. It's like a laser beam straight from the heart. I pray that I am not connected to my heart. Say one love, one world, one voice, and one love. One choice, one movement, one love. One people, one planet. Together we're forever one heart is magnetic. One world, one voice, and one. One choice, one movement, one people, one planet. Together we forever one heart. Yeah, well, we tell them bust down the barrier, carry the touch out our warrior. Gotta protect the rainbow, so my brain go over the area. Put up with them, gotta love them, trouble enough. I'm telling you, we're calling about them, with the consciousness to carry ya. Wings for many ways to uptake your cellular. Brighter than a long day, living a dumpy conqueror. Boom like through the earth, burn through the monitor. Your Lord of mercy, go on. One world, one voice, and one. One choice, one movement, one. One people, one planet. Together we forever one heart is magnetic. One world, one voice, and one. One choice, one movement, one. One people, one planet. Together we forever one heart. So what about for this? Swim out the metropolis, cause ice get melt like sun-kissed Icarus. When Lake Chad is dry to Baghdad, and your numbers don't add, just the greenhouse gas. Appalachian coal miner, fisherman in Bangladesh. Uncle Sam making checks, write his name by the X on the Valdez. Probably asthma's next. Little Johnny got a little funny knob in his neck. So what's the problem with that? He's just a corporate exec that extract that oil from the boils of the backs of Nigerians. Give me that. Passed out texts like refs through the Maverette. Offset politics. Copenhagen, no debate, we need the reparations. And while we waiting, another 600 acres gone in the Congo and Amazon. By the end of the song, so one. Yes, one. Thank you so much.
We're going to get into our first conversation piece. And before we start that, I'm going to ask the first panelists to come on up. But can you pull up the next? But before we start that, we're going to start with a little video to inspire you a little bit more about the first topic we're going to discuss tonight. So take a look.
Why did the generation before me leave us with a lot of environmental problems?
Where is the action that was once promised in spirit? There's so much power the world has, but we just don't do anything.
This isn't just us we're losing. This is future generations, the planet as a whole.
For me, this is not a problem that will only affect our future generations, but one that affects me now.
Why?
Why?
¿Por qué?
My question to the United Nations is,
Why? Why do you sit here and pretend and do nothing?
Why do we continue doing nothing when these drastic weather changes are already claiming the lives of people?
Why wait until it's too late to stop using fossil fuels?
Why do we continue to scour the globe for the last of the dwindling resources?
Why don't you take more action?
what are you leaders afraid of?
The environmental issues that are most important to me, for one, it's the drought,
The dredging of the Great Barrier Reef, the deforestation in Tasmania.
the dam that provides my city with water, is predicted to be drying up by next month.
All these organisms are becoming extinct.
Com a floresta amazônica sendo destruída, muita pouca umidade vem aqui para a região sul e sudeste, então provavelmente daqui a alguns anos a gente passa a ter pouquíssima água aqui.
My dad wanted to try put a wind turbine in our garden. The council said, no, it doesn't look pretty enough. If we actually want to try make a change, you've got to help us try make a change.
When my generation grows up, we may not have the time to hold summits about climate because it will have already affected us too much.
To the leaders of the UN, I would like to ask...
I would like to ask, why not?
Why not?
Why not?
Why not come up with region-specific solutions?
Why not?
Make the change to clean energy.
Why not focus on increasing the efficiency of renewable energy sources?
Why not inform and engage the students of this generation to act upon climate change?
Why not give tax benefits on green energy?
Por que não criar programa mais forte de proteção ambiental?
Why not be committed to a future for your people?
Me and the whole next generation are counting on you.
Why not now?
Why not now?
Why not now?
So I thought that would be a great place to start when we're looking at innovations for climate breakthrough. Why not? And to start answering these questions, I'd like to invite our first panelist up. We're going to have Ashelle Eldridge join us again, not necessarily in song this time around, and we're going to, like I said, do a fireside chat type thing where we're sitting up here. You don't have to get that far away from me. I don't bite usually. That's all right. Oh, there we go. And he is CEO and founder of SOS Juice and also founder of Earth Amplified, as well as obviously very talented performer. And then we have yet another very multifaceted woman. We have Zakiya Harris. So come on down, join us. Who is a change maker, educator, and artist, and I think much, much more. And then we also have Josh Fouts, who is executive director of Pioneers. So, you guys, because I never give up my mic, that's my rule. I have a mic for you guys to share, so we're gonna pass it around back and forth, like, you know. So my first question for you, and we're gonna be going back and forth between videos and stuff like that, so we're gonna turn around once in a while. But my first question for you pertains to that video. Why haven't we solved the climate crisis? What's up with that? Anyone? It's a simple question, you know, very, very straightforward and simple. Josh, you want to start? What do you think?
I always like to turn questions like this on their ear and
Yeah.
say that the opportunity to fix the climate crisis is actually by empowering the youth that are in these, that were featured in this video. And one of the things that I just saw this at Pioneers in October. I don't know if everyone can see this melting piece of ice here, but it's a relic that keeps manifesting. But the big thing that we are trying to face or trying to address is how do we create educational opportunities for more kids to be empowered to understand how to address the climate destruction crisis, because the reality is that very few of us in this room are going to suffer the trials of climate disruption as much as the millennial generation, the youngers of the millennial generation that were up on the screen. That doesn't answer your question, but I think that the answer to the question is more in the solution to the question.
Great, and Zakiya, I'm going to pull up a little bit of a maybe inspiration piece that there's a way to do it better. Find it. And so, yeah. Tell me.
Well, that's a very complex question, and so I think the answer is definitely as multifaceted. I think just some immediate thoughts that come up for me. I think we need to begin to root the conversation and other strategies beyond just policy. I think policy is really key and critical to this work. As someone that works typically with mostly under-resourced, underserved communities that are already bearing a brunt of issues just living life every day, I think that for me, the environmental movement needs to bring some inspiration so that people can see, understanding the effects and the impacts of global climate change, but also understand that there's some really inspiring solutions that we can take to get out of this. So I'd like to see a lot more work around social entrepreneurship, investment, and really investing in new models, to the point of working with communities that also don't really trust government, don't really believe that the next protest is going to be sufficient. I work in Oakland, California, where police brutality is an issue. I have young people that marched and protested and did that and have watched the system fail them. So when I educate them and get them to connect the dots in their life about global climate change, I can't hold up policy as the win-all solution for them. So I think there could be some reframing. I think that there can be some opportunity. I think we need to begin to broaden the conversation As an environmentally conscious community, what are additional on-ramps and strategic partnerships, and what does collaboration look like to get more people in the room?
And don't go too far into that, because
Okay.
your time's
So
coming up
lastly,
now.
I'll
We're
just
definitely
say,
coming to that.
even the whole climate crisis, some people don't even use that language. So how do we even create shared language that allows everybody to kind of get on the same road that we're on? So those are some immediate thoughts.
Great. Michelle, do you have something to say? Why
So
haven't we
that's
solved
what
it
I
yet?
to add to it as a kid, just like, big ups to this block of ice right there too, you know what I'm saying? That's what I'm saying.
We'll pick it up in a
Yeah,
little
let
bit.
people
We'll
see,
put it up
and
again.
have people explain, what this is about. I mean, I've really been, it's someone who's worked on, food, I worked on Alliance for Climate Education, so I worked with young people directly for 5.5 years around the country, around climate solutions in the school, in the community. Worked on like leadership development in that piece. Also work with a number of organizations working on solutions to climate. But one thing I started, also have a master's in transpersonal psychology, right? So I studied shamanism and vibrational therapies and sat with different spiritual teachers. So my perspective on it now is really coming to me is it's really that consciousness, and how can art and say these things outside of policy, these strategies be employed to really sort of awaken humanity and shift consciousness. Like out of a shift of consciousness, so people recognizing who they are. Like my friend Prince E, he just came out a video on letting this world go. Right? It's really out of that when we get to that point of understanding what our purpose is, what our potentials is, and why we're actually here on a soul level. There are myriad of solutions that come out of that. And it's not obviously like a silver bullet like we're talking about, but I think they're going to be really authentic and long-lasting from that standpoint. So I'm sort of working with young people in that capacity, working with groups in that capacity, and really looking at how can we create change from the inside out, and really have folks identify who they are. It's really enlivening and really rewarding to do that.
And that's a really great segue to the next topic that we're going to shift into that I think all of you have touched on. But we have another video to show you first. And I think you'll see in the video there's some issues that were brought up about access to information and who's part of the conversation. So take a look at this.
This is your brain. This is your brain on Princess.
Superstar. Superstar.
This is your brain on engineering. Any questions?
No princesses or chickens were harmed in that film. But I think it's talking very specifically about engineering, which certainly could be a pathway to certain innovations or one way to foster innovation. But I think it brings up some very pertinent questions to the work that all of you do of how do we get more people involved in climate action? And that I think brought up a couple of barriers, particularly gender barriers. But what do you think, Michelle? How do we get more people involved? And I actually have a little image to bring up, sorry. Based upon a conversation we had here, I think everyone, the voice on like all media around climate change is Bill Nye the Science Guy these days. So something that we had talked about, Ashel, in our conversation before was like about knowledge is in many different places. And I liked this quote of everyone you will ever meet knows something you don't. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to that idea of, in terms of engaging new audiences. Maybe where
right, yeah, I think so as he was touching upon this, like the framework and how you frame the conversation, I think that, I think everyone has solutions to climate change and are already impacting climate, positively. For example, I think that we have a sort of narrow bandwidth of what we think, in climate change impact, positive climate change, positive impact on climate looks like. I think it also goes back to what I was just mentioning, which is like, when we have a process in schools and we're working with young people, the first process is not so much like, part of the process is not so much like, telling folks what they need to do. It's more sort of like a process of self-discovery around what are they passionate about, and connecting the dots between their passion and sort of the big, impact possibilities. So that's sort of how I think about that. So, there's if you're an artist, there's different ways you can engage. There's people who may be really interested in some, the more technical aspects of climate science or renewable energy, whatever the field is. But I think that first part is really crucial to sort of meeting people where they're at and figuring out how we can move that. And a lot of times, the first part of it is like inspiration, and then it opens up. So I'm glad we have this conversation on art, because there's so many people that I'm in communication with. Videos has over, some of our videos, Earth Amplified has over like a million views and things like that. And the response is overwhelming. Like, people are like, oh, I didn't even know, even though this is out out in society, people are talking about fasting pollution, for example, and they're like, yeah, they know they should do that, but they never heard it in this context, and they never heard it from the perspective of a pop culture song parody or whatever. So sort of using those tools, and sort of like my friend Nita, because he calls it tricknology, he calls it, but tricknology, yeah, he's gonna like that. But it's sort of like using what we have that actually, what actually look at, what's actually touching like a bunch of people. So, having engaged in a conversation right now, making a storyboard, a video on fracking, music video, but I'm taking elements from pop culture, for example, and then we have like a whole education piece tied to that. They can actually go more in depth in that, because there's a lot of people who are not necessarily in that space looking at fracking every day and the impacts of that. So. And
Zakia, we'll bring up this next slide. I think there'll be a lot of familiar things to you up there. And I think it echoes a lot of what Ashel is talking about. You had talked about this concept of fun being important somehow. Can you speak in your own personal experience of how that might engage more people?
Yeah, Run for the Green is an organization that I founded about 5 years ago. We're not operational at this time. But basically, we kind of took a lot of the strategies that Ashel spoke to, and we engaged youth of color in particular around environmentalism using hip hop. And so we start that process with taking young people out to nature and educating them on global climate change and having them have that transformative experience with the earth, right? Because that's what we all had. That's the experience that all brought us into this room. That's the experience that all led us to do the work that we've all chosen to do. And I think that we have to be cautious that when we're working with other communities, that we don't just focus on come to the protest, come to my event, show up here, do this, and that we actually empower them with the same context to understand this world that we've been provided. And then we told the young people, translate this information and make really cool events for your folks this summer using hip hop. And so we have the first hip hop solar powered concert in San Francisco. We never used the word climate change. We never used the word environmentalist. People came to a concert that was inspirational and fun, and then they saw these awesome solar panels and were like, oh my God, that's powering this. We had a major MC, Talib Kweli, come, and that microphone that he's holding was ran off a bicycle. We fed young people bike-powered smoothies. We fed them organic food. We set up resource recovery stations so they understood their environmental impact with composting and recycling. We fed them organic fair trade chocolate and used that as an opportunity to talk about fair trade and really connecting the dots. But if I would have walked into that room and said, raise your hand if you're an environmentalist, probably no hand would have gone up. But I said, how many of you guys live in a neighborhood where there's not a lot of grocery stores? How many of you know somebody with asthma, cancer, diabetes? How many of you live next to the port or next to the refinery or next to the dump? They get that. How many of you have asthma? They get that. They're making the connections, but it has to be culturally relevant. They need to see leaders like themselves doing this work. We have to have new models of engagement. And then when they got to the concert, it was all about green careers and green jobs and connecting them with food justice programs and other programs to take that next step. But it's a lifestyle change, right? And so how can our work as educators and as change makers really empower people to make that hard shift? Because once you make the hard shift, everything else comes. But if you start here, it doesn't go back down to the heart if you start in the mind.
Yeah. And we're done. We've closed the evening. and Josh, on the next slide, and I think we've already started this conversation, but something you have talked about, and with your work at Pioneers, is like this idea of silos and a need to kind of support community and break down barriers. Can you add to that?
So, first of all, I'm blown away by the story we just heard here. We could close it with that, but we need to the system that our education system is built for a 19th century factory worker system, and we need to blow it up. And it's siloed, it's racist, it's non-inclusive, and there are lots of subtle ways that it happens. In a previous incarnation, here's just an example of how we're trying to twist the system. I was running a science education foundation, and one of our projects was to give teachers around the world microscopes for kids between the ages of 10 to 14 years old. And we asked the teachers to do something different. And that was, after they used the microscopes in their science class, to have the kids take their microscope with them to their literature class, and their drama class, and their art class. And the end result, with an example, with one school, is that the students got so enamored with the discoveries they made under the microscope that they anthropomorphized them, looked up the history of the discoveries, wrote stories about those discoveries, and then they wrote a play about the discoveries, and then did an art show where they blew up the microscopic images that they had. And one of the things they took away with it was that science is not an identity that you leave behind in the classroom. It's an identity that you take with you, and that's catalyzed and transformed through art. And that subtle little difference is, I think, one of the things that can also help to break down some of the racial barriers. When people see themselves as different, and then they go in and they realize that you can take that identity with you, and you can blend it and turn it, transform it into something more creative and powerful. And so one of the things that we're trying to do with Pioneers is we work really hard to bring exactly the kids that are on the front lines. As you say, it's criminal, but it is the reality in the East Bay that it's predominantly minority kids who are on the front lines of some of the major environmental crimes that are going on, that are exposing them and their health to these sorts of things. So the fact that you're taking these kids on their own terms and turning it into a positive is just really incredible. So
yeah.
That's what I have to say.
And I think that again segues really nicely, and Zakir, I'm going to come to you first this time. And I think you already spoke to this a little bit, but so there are all these innovations that exist, and we're going to speak about certain innovations later. We're getting there, both social and tech and all of the different things out there. But how do we communicate it? So it's great if they exist on their own and no one knows about them, or no one's implementing them, then what good are they doing for us in terms of impacting climate? So how do we communicate it? And one word that you said to me when we had our conversation the other week was context. And I think you already spoke to that some, but can you tell us a little bit more of what do you think? What do we need to really communicate innovation for climate?
Well, one thing I say is, our young people, I'm a mother, I have a 9-year-old daughter, and we know all the crazy images our young people are constantly bombarded with every single day. And we have to bombard our communities just as much with a new message, with a new narrative. We have to not be afraid of social media, not be afraid of technology. And I think in certain ways, Inconvenient Truth really kind of pioneered a new way of America recognizing that environmental films can actually be really cool. You saw King Corn, and you saw all the Food Inc. and all these other movies that kind of came out of that wave. And I think that's a really good model, actually, in terms of how we can continue to use media and technology as a tool to communicate, because that's actually where our young people are. That's the information they're getting. They're online. They're using all of these channels. So I think that we need to make sure that we are speaking to that and we're relevant and we make it cool, not because we're trying to be cool, because we are cool, and we just reflect that back. So I think that's part of setting the context. And I think to both of the points that have been made, we want to make environmental education a lens, a pair of glasses that regardless of what work you do, what career you choose, what job you get, you look through everything with that lens. And if we can empower people to do that, most of the times when you tell young people what's going on, they get it. They actually get it better than anybody. They don't need us to educate them. They need us to be allies and they need us to be mentors, but I think that young people have the solutions. I think that video really showed it. It's more about who's listening and yeah.
And Josh, I want to come to you next, and we have a little cartoon to pull up that we always like to add a little bit of humor here. It says, it was commissioned in the 1890s by climate scientists, and it's like the screen, you know, handsome. So how are we communicating climate, Josh? What do you think? Is it through, I mean, this would be an example of fear, maybe? Communicate it.
Well, I think the dominant media narrative around climate is largely controlled by big corporations, and the government is certainly in bed with them. I went to an award ceremony in 2013, which was the World Food Prize Award. It was the first week that John Kerry was Secretary of State, and they gave out an award for innovation in food security. And the three people who were finalists for it were Monsanto scientists, and it turned out that the jury was equally so. And so, but you know, the fact is that the people in the government are not evil. They truly believe that the solution for improving access to food worldwide despite climate disruption is by patenting seeds and keeping a single seed in line that is resistant to certain types of climate change. And that provides a great challenge for us when it comes to telling the stories and what the actual narrative around this is, and looking at the realities of what these stories are like. That Zakia's talking about with kids in her neighborhood makes it a real challenge. But the solution, I think, or one of the answers to that is each of us taking ownership of the story ourselves and sharing it. Lisa Hoyo here with Climate Kids is doing tremendous work. I think we have people in our audience, and the other thing I think is really exciting is that we have German diplomats who are here, people who are advocating policy for government are also on the front lines of helping to reshape and reframe the narrative. And so I commend you I commend the German consulate for partnering on something like this, and you for bringing us together, because I think these are the kind of relationships that we need to foster. We need foreign policy to sit at the same table with activists and with innovators in order to really amplify and correct the narrative.
Great, and Michelle, I want to give you a chance for this too in terms of how do we communicate it, and I feel like you'll definitely recognize the logo on the right up there, but something that you had talked about a lot when we had a conversation was also about making it personal in terms of communication. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, so it goes back to what I was saying, when we create that story of self, when we're doing work with young people, for example, we can do a workshop with anybody who do this. And what's your personal story and interaction with climate? What's your personal interaction with food? What's your food story? Out of that is going to be the most authentic response to any issue that we're trying to face versus someone sort of giving you a template of what you can choose from and actually move in that direction. What I find is really most exciting about this moment is like we just highlighted. I'm realizing I actually just saw you at Earth Island Institute.
Yeah.
Earlier today, I was just there today. I was like, it's familiar. Right, so the bouncing ideas, being in the same space at the same time, like setting up these like conditions for like an evolutionary process. I think what's really powerful right now is that there is this multimedia aspect of education. The Alliance for Climate Education got Climate Change Communicator of the Year award for 2 years, like a couple of years ago, because of the multimedia aspect and sort of the diversity portrayed, and also the youth being able to look at the actual stuff that we were presenting and actually critique it and give feedback. So it was actually a living organism thing versus a top-down delivered aspect. And it took some time for the organization to get to that point. It took some time for us as a humanity to get to that point. Like, wow, this is an all hands on deck situation. And what we're seeing now, we're seeing like the consciousness reflected and giving us biofeedback pretty frequently because we have the technology, right? So we're seeing like, oh, wait a minute, there is Ferguson happening, and there's this happening, and there's all these things happening at the same time. We can actually see it, feel it, taste it more, and have to give our own energetic imprint response to that more quickly. And this is like a very fun time actually when you think about it, because we can actually, what we're seeing is that is actually the possibility of another threshold, another plateau of response that actually create a new plateau for us as humanity to actually have a concerted, unified field sort of front in some ways, not necessarily coordinated intellectually, but just by our authenticity of the transparency that's developed right now. Like you kind of have hard pressed nowadays based on what we're given, and people do know about inconvenient foods. They know about these different conversations more and more all the time. So yeah, so the more time we have space for people to actually communicate this and have that more transparency happen, and the more powerful solutions we'll see arise, I think.
Great, and you guys keep giving me such natural segues. It's really awesome. It seems scripted. This is where I actually want to give these guys a really great round of applause, and we're going to bring them back up. Thank you for this conversation. And I think all of you really touched on this idea of creating opportunities to share stories and to tell stories. And we're really excited that we started partnering with StoryCorps, if you've heard of them, which is exactly a platform for doing that. Tess is starting to collect your cards. 10, 9. And pens up. Tess is coming around to collect your cards. And I hope, regardless of what, I know it's hard to put like pressure on creative thinking, but hopefully you guys inspired each other a little bit with your story. And if you do want to join us for StoryCorps, make sure your contact information is on there, and that you're available tomorrow during the day to be at the San Francisco Public Library. All right, so Tess, my wonderful colleague here, is collecting your stories. And we are going to, you guys can relax for a little bit, and we'll call you back up. And Greg, unless you're dancing. So, and if you could just pass your cards over to this side of the aisle, just pass them down this way, Tess. Oh. Pass them to your left. Pass them to your left, Tess. Over there. Sorry. All right, so now for our next round, we're going to have another source of inspiration, a live performance, and then we're going to have another short conversation. And so I'm really excited to have dance, and we have an amazing performance in store. Come on up, ladies.
though. I swear it was. Maybe it's back here. I remember it was here. Remember what it felt like? Where did it go? Where's winter? Where the hell did it go, you guys? I remember. I swear it was like. It was. I don't know. Molly! Yeah. I found it, man! It's right here! Ah! Come here, get some! It feels so good! Get some of that. Here!
Oh, yeah. Oh,
this is I always remembered.
Look.
Get it, kind of.
All ready for winter.
Here we go.
As climate change brings forth catastrophic challenges, your very survival hangs in the balance. How will you protect your family and ensure continuity when millions face an uncertain future? In these dark times, it can be hard to see a way out. While others look to Senate bills or UN accords for a solution to global warming, you demand peace of mind now. After many months of research and development, we are pleased to bring you Survivaball. The best engineers from America's biggest corporations have come together for this state-of-the-art solution to global warming. Each Survivaball contains all the tools you need to enjoy a safe and happy stay on our changing planet. Survivaball is a self-powered, self-cooling, self-heating, self-hydrating, total recycling, emergency life-sustaining device designed to protect you and your family from impending future calamities brought on by climate change. Survivaball protects from a myriad of climate-induced dangers: ice age, hurricanes, rising sea levels, droughts, and many more. In a future that brings many potential problems, Survivaball is one simple solution within your reach, ensuring human continuity for generations to come. Survivaball, don't sweat it.
Here, you can have mine. Oh.
Hello.
I was going to break my own rule.
I should know how that works, but anyway. Well, what's exciting? I think exciting is examples which can change your life. This is an example of a very energy efficient building. I saw many of those in Europe, but also in this country. And I could imagine everybody who works in a little, very loud and dark office would love to work in a very energy efficient building, which is with a nice microclimate and doesn't need a strong AC, so it's not too cold, not too loud. So this is exciting. Or what is exciting, if you produce your own energy in your community and then you just suddenly you get a new business out of your needs, and that is very exciting. So there are hundreds of examples how your daily life can be much improved with positive examples.
And Greg, you told me when we were talking that you get excited about something different, and specifically you had said data,
right.
Information, and so we put up something to inspire you, data visualization. But maybe you can talk about what really excites you, what innovation is exciting you.
So data is important, but it's only half the story. I'm all for gadgets, but really no, it's not enough. We can't put a gadget on something and think it'll change anything. What we really need to change, the most powerful innovation we can make is in our own minds. It's our own ideas about how we could do things differently. And I think as human beings, we're maximizers, and we say, oh, I want to do the next thing and make it really big and make a lot of it and it'll change everything and so forth. But really the next thing is not a thing at all. It's a different attitude and different logic. Technology has the term techne, know-how, and logic, which means how to think, right? How to make sense of things. And we need new innovations. And so the next big thing that I'm excited about is your idea that you have, that you say, oh, I discovered something and I'm going to do something differently about my life. And that's what you're not going to change. You're going to stick to it. You're going to be proud of it. And that's where change really comes from. And then sometimes we can pack an idea into a device, but really that is just a shadow of an idea. That's really a shadow of a change. With data, the other thing that's important is that when we do have ideas, we can measure how things were before we had our idea and after we had our idea. And we can compare the measurement before and after, and we can say, well, did it actually work or not? Was it a good idea or a bad idea? And we need to be open to evaluating our ideas and seeing if it actually worked or not. Ideology is not going to help. Judgment will help. And data is a key ingredient in good judgment.
And I'm going to go over to you. Something that we have talked a lot about before in terms of innovation is this idea of social innovation and creating spaces to help people innovate. So what excites you about innovation for climate? What's going on that excites you?
Sure. So I think it was interesting to see that there was a quote from Thomas Edison up on the screen before. Because in some ways he's essentially thought of as emblematic of this idea of a lone genius working alone, which is actually a total myth, right? He was an incredible collaborator. He started over 200 companies in his lifetime, and when he found out that Alexander Graham Bell was working on a technology that was perhaps competitive with his, he organized what might have been the first hackathon. He brought dozens of people together for a 3-day sprint. So what is exciting to us about social innovation as a powerful force for innovation is this idea that we don't need to be working on these problems alone. I think that we've got a lot of bright people in the room, probably some people that might even be experts on this topic. No one has all the answers. No one even has all the answers for one side of this huge problem. So the power of social innovation and social networking technology to connect people so that we can share ideas and collaborate and working together is what I think has me most excited, and certainly it's what we're working on with Open Idea.
So
Great, yeah, Georg, you want to add to that?
Push back a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm all for collaboration, and we teach this and so forth. But frankly speaking, if we were so good at it since Edison's time, why do we have all the problems we have? So it's not necessarily good enough to really serve us well. And sometimes we collaborate on the wrong thing, and we get really good at solving the wrong problem. And so it's not enough. So what else?
And actually, I think that's perfect for the next video I want to show you, which is a parody. And it's actually an example speaking specifically to an Australian public, but it speaks to this idea of kind of getting stuck in old ways of doing things, and also where power lies within our different communities. So take a look.
Climate policy, we see a lot of opportunities. We see new jobs. We see exciting new jobs, actually. We see innovation. We see a lot of business, of course. And of course, there are different sides to business. I mean, that's why what you saw here, you have good examples in Australia, and you have a strong lobby in Australia. You have a strong lobby over here from the old business. You have it over here, and then Europe, and you have to, to take them on board. And that's a challenge, I think. So we have a lot of new opportunities. Nobody is neglecting that. Everybody knows about that. But the question is, can we upscale it? Can we make it the priority? And that's where we are working.
Ingrid, we have a picture here that has money in the background, because that's one opportunity that was brought up in the video for jobs and things. But what's another opportunity that you see in terms of climate?
I don't know, I have to go a little bit in a different direction here as well.
Yeah.
In this building, we do a lot of research concerning climate and energy, and one of the researchers, I asked him the same question, so what should we do? And she said, get a massage. Seriously, just get a massage. I'm like, why get a massage? I said, well, because it's good for you, and it's good for the planet, and it's something you can enjoy that doesn't actually burn up any resources apart from, the labor of another person that is well compensated. And so, so I said, okay, fine, I'll try that out. I got my massage. I actually felt better, and nothing was burned, nothing was consumed except some oxygen, right? And so really the answer is, the opportunity is to do different things. What other things can we do that are simply different from what we did up till now? And maybe we shouldn't fly to things. Maybe we should walk to them. Maybe we should think different logics. Maybe we should try out thinking about goals that we never had before. And so set new goals, that's the opportunity, and then figure out what kinds of economies develop around those goals. But not the same goals with different means. Let's try some new goals.
And Jason, that's a lot of what you do at Open IDEO, is creating spaces for people to create differently and think differently. And I think you'll recognize, hopefully, the graphic that comes up, that I think are some of the key words that you work with in terms of working with other people. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you think are some of the innovation opportunities that climate presents us?
Yeah, and partially to redress Greg's question before, I think it's right. It's not necessarily collaboration alone. It's an opportunity to have more people work together, but the paradigm that Greg is talking about is that we need to revisit and have a different way of thinking is truly important. And within our context as designers, we think about that in terms of a design brief, right? So it's the opportunity to, for instance, right now, communities are in a much better position in terms of their own ability to start choosing renewable energy. Absolutely, policy change is important too. But communities are now more empowered than ever to be able to start making some of their own energy choices. And so I think that creating space for people to work together is important, but you do need to have the contextual framework that guides that collaboration in a smart direction. And I'd say that some of those things that are changing that hopefully will create more productive collaboration are around being able to think differently in terms of the economic value of addressing climate change, but also hopefully being able to think more long term. And I think that that's one of our biggest constraints, not just as a political system or as an economy or even at a very micro level in terms of families, being able to think longer term rather than what's the next, whatever it is, paycheck, next policy, next election, next quarterly income statement. That sort of long-term thinking is a big part of the paradigm that I think needs to be supported to be able to collaborate in the right way.
And Greg, you want to add to that?
Well, I think it's a fascinating point. It makes me think about data literacy and climate literacy. How can we understand things that take thousands of years to develop beyond our lifespan? It's a little bit like, a friend of mine was diagnosed with diabetes, and if you don't do the right thing, you will die in 5-10 years. If you do the right thing, you have a long lifespan ahead of you. And then these choices that you have to make as a result of having diabetes are daily. So your daily habits affect your full lifespan. And diabetes makes it very clear. We have to reduce consumption of sugar and all sorts of things. And you have to measure and think and make decisions in a completely different way. But that kind of restraint of thinking thoughtfully, thinking carefully about what you do right now because it matters for the long term, that we have to scale up to as a time frame of 300-500 years. And then, diabetes is already very difficult to handle because it deals with time spans of maybe 50 years. But now amplify that times 10, and then amplify it by every human being, because we all have this problem, right? So then we get in a very complex space. And so there, new opportunities for climate literacy and data literacy really do open up. And it's a good point you made about different time frames.
Yeah, and I actually want to keep it with you, Greg, because as we had started off talking about, there are already so many great innovations that are out there that we're not even taking advantage of when it's about addressing climate change. And there's some very simple ones and some very complex. There's some that are tech answers, some that are social. But what do we need to actually implement these, to actually get them to happen in our communities? And to not only implement them, but then to grow them and to scale them up. And I think I'd like to keep it with you, Greg, because you had talked about, again, coming back to information and data and maybe having it communicated in new ways that's maybe more interactive. Can you talk to us a little bit more about how that could be a tool for implementing some of these solutions?
A lot of the things we're looking at here are not particularly exciting to us. The average graph of, that's again, yes. The average graph that shows a global warming, a seawater level change is not exciting. And that's because we don't have the culture that goes with it. And we don't have a culture that engages in data deeply. So we have cinema culture where we want to know what happens next, right? And movies are really boring if nothing interesting happens for a while. But graphs are kind of like really boring movies. And the question is, how can we learn to use graphs in a way that will tell a really exciting story, where at the end of the graph it says, and what happens next, And then we have this kind of on-the-ball attention where we really want to know what happens next. And guess what? With climate change, what happens next depends on us. So we're in charge. We're the main actor in this data story, and we get to drive this. And that feeling of being in charge of the data and not just looking at it, that's what I'm trying to get at. I think that's the new and exciting information space we can open up.
And can you pass the mic over there? What do you think? What are some of the ways we can implement more of these innovations that already exist?
Where do we begin?
Well, I can give you a little thing that we had talked about that maybe will start you. And you had talked about open source being an important component of it, of sharing of technologies and information.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're starting to see just on our platform is the sharing of models that work in one location and their potential for being replicated elsewhere. I was reading today several different posts, actually from the UK and from Holland, talking about energy cooperatives. And a model that might not exist everywhere, but that can be helpful in other locations for more people to be able to take advantage of renewable energy. Another example is much more off the grid context is the spread of solar light businesses in the developing world, helping small micro entrepreneurs be able to start using solar devices as a revenue generation for their own businesses or families, and as a way to just bring light into their homes. Models that can start showing signs of working in places and can be replicated. It's not that every model can be replicated, it probably needs to be adapted to different contexts, but I think that where we start seeing examples of success, it's important to think about them and to perhaps build on them. And the possibility just to share the information about what's working, I think, is powerful. And, there's urgency to this issue, so we need to accelerate our ability to have impact as much as possible. And I think that building on examples that are working is one thing.
And Georg, I want to come to you because something that we've talked a lot about was something that Zakia actually brought up in terms of, we brought up this old image of startling stories of again, bringing back the fun, the entertainment component of it. Can you speak some to that in terms of how do we actually implement it? And Greg, you have to pass him the mic.
Well, yeah, of course, there's a lot of fun if you look at different solutions, particularly when people start to get excited when they change their life to a better. I mean, not only in a moral way, but also in a daily, sensible way. Like, they're having better solutions, nicer houses, and maybe nicer jobs even. But coming back to the implementation thing, which is crucial, I think it's a mix. It's a simple question, but the answer is very complex because you have to work bottom up and top down. So we on the policy work more top down because we think even if people don't care, and if you look around, many people don't care. Even if you improve the information and get more people on board, many people don't care. They don't even know. Even in that situation, you need something to change because we don't have so much time. So I think policy is very crucial, and you have to switch fuels. You have to switch the way you generate power. You have to switch the way we have our transport system, and you can do that from top down. And that is the place I work. And of course, we need all the activities on the bottom up, and hopefully that comes together. That is the thing. That is the future I see. How we implement that.
Great, Greg. You look like you want to add to that.
You just made me think of we built an air quality sensor a while ago, and we put it into one of my friend's apartments, and she measured it, and she noticed that every time her air quality in the apartment looked terrible. It was like really high levels of CO2 and CO, and I'm like, what are you doing every morning? Do you like fry turkeys every morning? Is that how you start your day? Is that why you have so much pollution in your apartment? And she's like, oh no, I don't fry turkeys. I just open the windows and let the fresh air in. I'm like, well, you open the windows and you live near a freeway, so you open the windows during commute hours and you air your apartment. And she's like, yeah. And I said, well, let's try doing it at a different time. And so she started airing out her apartment at midnight before she went to bed, as opposed to in the morning when she woke up. And it turns out the air quality in her apartment became dramatically better. So that's just doing something slightly different, right? Nothing was bought, nothing was spent. It's just a simple shift in when you open the windows, and it produced better health for her and better health for her plants and a clean atmosphere. And she didn't have to stop the freeway to do it. It was just a simple shift of pattern. So I think these kinds of ways of thinking, if we could scale that up to the policy level, that would be great. How can we do it a different way? So that's my favor to you, my request to you is, can we do that? Can we create policies that shift patterns productively?
Jason, do you want to add to that?
I think that one other element that we would bring to just the question of implementation is, at IDEO we talk a lot about the idea of creative competence, being able to think of yourself as a creative leader, and there's all sorts of different manifestations that can take. But I think that's when you think about that applied to the policy context, where policymakers are actually encouraged to be creative, where they're not penalized for risk taking, where failure is potentially embraced at times as a method for learning. Think about the difference in culture between policy and what we hear of as culture in Silicon Valley or other sources, other places of innovation. And I think that element of creativity that is happening from so much of the bottom-up innovation, there needs to be ways for it to get faster into the top-down so much control over resources in the direction of the future.
Well, hopefully with you guys coming together and coming from those different directions, we can keep this conversation going about methods to do that. I want to thank you all for this conversation, and we're going to bring everyone up at the end. We have one more performance, so you're almost ready for more wine. We're almost there. But thank you so much, and a round of applause for them. And we'll bring up our last performance. Don't go too far, because we're going to come back up in a second. And you may recognize her from before. We have our wonderful, multifaceted Zakia Harris, who is going to perform our last inspirational piece for us tonight.
Check. Can you turn the mic up a little bit? Hi.
We don't have
control. Okay, no problem. This song is by one of my favorite singers ever. Her name's Niemeyer, and it's called Mosquitoes Tweeter. And she actually covered it from Tina Turner. It's my rendition.
Wash out your mouth, your lies are getting dusty. Can't believe it, nothing you say. Cause I'm alive and I see what you do. You know you're funky-eyed and the mosquitoes tweet. You got a mind like a herd of old weevils. Same old game, same old thing. You never change, always talk about the same old thing. I got something to tell you, baby, but you ain't it to me, baby. You're blowing minds was a thing of the past. You blew your chance, that's why it never lasts. You won't be a graduated mother, but in reality you're just another brother. Think you're slick, but you could stand a lot of grease, and things you do ain't never really pleasing. Can't believe in nothing you say, cause I'm alive and I see what you do, you know. Then a mosquito's tweet, you got a mind like a herd of old weevils. Same old game, same old thing. You never change, always talking about the same old thing. Same old game, same old thing, same old game. Blowing minds was the thing of the past. You blew your chance, that's why you never last. You wanna be a graduated mother, but in reality you're just another brother. You think you're slick, but you could stand a lot of grease, and things you do ain't never really pleasing. Can't believe in nothing you say, cause I'm alive and I see what you do. You know you're funky-eyed and the mosquitoes tweet. You got a mile like a herd of old weevils. Same old game, same old thing. Same old game, it's the same old thing. Talking same old game, same old thing. Same old game, same old thing. Always talking about the same old thing. Thank you.
If we had a recipe for addressing climate change right now. What are the essential ingredients for you that just have to be in that recipe or else it will not work at all? Zakia, do you want to start us off?
I think cultural relevancy. When I work with communities, mostly communities of color, we always start with what is their cultural and historical connection to the earth. We don't start with global climate change. So who was the last person in your community that actually, in your family, that actually grew food? We reframe people like Harriet Tubman as someone who walked 80 miles through the forest because she had a really great understanding of the forest and the planet. And that was how she was able to get people to freedom. We reframe George Washington Carver as not just someone who invented a lot of uses from peanut, but as someone who built his whole entire laboratory out of recycled garbage, which is a true story. So I think cultural relevancy, understanding that every community has their own connection with the environment, and that heart connection is always going to come from that. Growing leadership, showing leaders that reflect them, that look like them, so they can understand that solutions aren't outside of themselves because they come from people that are coming from their communities. Using innovation, which I think we've talked so much about here. Using new media, making sure that we were using media and technology. I think we've talked a lot about that as well. What else would I add? Inspiration, we talked about that too. Just keeping that spirit alive as well.
Great. Greg, do you have something? Yeah.
Yeah, so the recipe is very simple. Measure, deliberate, share, and measure again. And if we have something that's better at the end, we should keep doing it. And if we don't have something better, we should think again. So, but the key part is deliberation. You spoke about that so eloquently as well. You can't just measure and then do something by yourself. You got to deliberate. Deliberate means hanging out with people who are unlike you and figuring out how you can still do something together. It's easy to do things with people who are like you because, you know, it's a big deal. You like each other already. But you have to go to where it's different and then push there and then measure again. So, yeah.
I'll build on that. I think I'd add a firm, resolute, compelling conviction. It needs to be a story that we all believe in for us to tell it well. And there's enough data for us all to believe it really, really clearly. And also a determined iterative process, right? It's not about trying one answer and if it doesn't work, giving up. Measure and use that measurement to then improve what you just tried. Consider all of your efforts, experiments, and keep building on them. Keep iterating. And that's where that determined and conviction is so important because it's not going to come easy. You're going to need to keep trying, and you'll be faced with opposition all along.
True that.
Keep it going, Josh.
Well, I'll take Zakia's multi-grain climate education pie. Bake it at about 350 degrees. Take it out of the oven and add a layer of icing that includes these words. Peace is not the absence of conflict; it's your attitude toward conflict. And I'll leave it at that.
Well, wise words. Well, in the end, climate crisis, the reason for that is the emission of greenhouse gases. So definitely we need some ingredients which are free of greenhouse gases, and we need solutions, alternatives, and looking for fun things, good lifestyle without greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, that's one thing. Massage.
Massages, right? Yeah. You leave anything tonight, massages. Innovation. So my last question, and this is really for all of you, and I hope if you do stay, we keep talking about this, and if you don't, then we keep talking about it in other ways, both locally, but now we have an international presence in the room. I wanted to end with this quote, which I just always I come back to a lot, is it always seems impossible until it's done. And that was from Nelson Mandela, who I think really lived that in many ways. And so I want to ask you I think a challenge and a question is, what climate innovation, what can we do right now? What can we implement You know, we've been talking all night, and talk is really important. But what can we truly create and do and implement right now? What are you ready to do? It's a big question.
Who's got the microphone?
Everyone wants it. Go.
Well, I think one thing we can do right now is thank each other for this event and for listening to each other. And I actually want to thank Laurie, who's standing right there, for making the event possible physically. Thank you. And it's so simple, but just gratitude for what's done right. Gratitude for the ice that's there. That's what I do.
So very, very shamelessly, sorry for that, I'll mention an opportunity that's available right now to anyone here or elsewhere, which is right now OpenIDEO is trying to collect stories, perspectives from around the world, research ideas about the question of communities leading the rapid transition to renewable energy. The research phase of our challenge is what we start with, because before getting into ideas and brainstorming and prototyping, we first want to ground the challenge in the context of what is it like on the ground, what are the users that we're designing for, what are the communities and their realities that we need to know about before we start thinking about how can these communities lead this rapid transition. And so the call to action is go to a neighborhood business and ask them if they've ever thought about renewable energy. Go to a church, a school. Who is that you define as your community? Because so we think that communities are more and more empowered to make this transition. So identify the community that you feel most close to and start asking some of these questions. And then please share that story with us. There's a global community that's participating in this conversation right now. And we'd love to hear from you.
I just blew a buffer. No, I think one of the things that is near and dear to my heart is the fact that each of us has been empowered with great ideas. There are a lot of brilliant social entrepreneurs and innovators here in this room. And what I try to challenge myself to do every day is to not stand for my own flag, but stand for the flag of others. One of the mantras of Pioneer's founders is that we're a radically inclusive organization. And so I try to own that every day. And it's very difficult in a society such as in a Western society like the US, where each of us has been raised to believe that we need to build our own mountain rather than to think about blowing up the mountain and standing together with each other. It's that we're all relatives, and we have to in this time of as quoting another thing, one of the Pioneers founders said, we've gone from a period of urgency to emergency, and in a time of emergency, the responsibility is on us to stand together, to find inroads for collaboration, to put aside the differences, and really work hard to stand together, because the only way we're going to be able to individually address these things is by addressing it together as a whole.
Zakia, do you have something?
Just to echo the sentiments, I think everybody said, just lifting up that piece around the edge. You know, permaculture teaches us that the edge, where the river meets the ocean and the forest, that there's a biodiversity that's created in different people and different energies coming together that is not replicated anywhere. And I think that that's a really powerful teaching for us right now. I think all of us are playing our own role. So I think everyone in this room wouldn't be here if they weren't already doing something. And I think that we have to understand that that's okay, and that there's stuff that other people can be doing as well. And so I think just holding on to the edge, recognizing that we all really play our part. And you know, I look at my daughter who's 9, and you know, the internet is something that is kind of constant for her. Having a black president is her normal. You know, eating organic food is her normal. I know that's not the normal for everybody, but I want to lift up the fact of possibility. I want to lift up the fact that, yeah, there's a lot of data that looks really bad, and there's also the opportunity for something different to happen. And I think that if we don't hold that within our own spirits, we've almost given up before we've even tried it. I'm optimistic in humanity. I'm optimistic in our ability to do something different, that the jobs that my daughter's going to have haven't even been created yet. we don't even know. So there's this whole also aspect of, as we are kind of in this very interesting place of, we're in the middle of the death of one paradigm and the birth of another. And I think that's a really difficult place to be in sometimes. It can be really challenging. And I think we have to recognize that we're in that place. And so some of what's dying just needs to die so that the new life can come through. And I think we have to remember to hold that in our hearts.
Perfect place to end. Thank you. And thanks to all of you for being here tonight and for taking part in this conversation and for being inspirational, both on the stage and in the audience. And I hope we can end in challenging each other to continue to innovate in our own lives, in our own ways, and to help not only find those spaces where we can really affect climate and our communities and the many other things that are important in our lives, but that we can help create more spaces for others to do that and to find their own. So thank you so much for joining us this evening, and I hope it's very much the beginning of this new paradigm.
Thank you, Georg.